Well, thank you so much and greetings, everyone. Thank you once again for joining today's CSW Parallel event, Women's Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. I'm Anna Ikeda from Soka Gakkai International, and together with my co-moderator, Monica Willard, we're delighted to welcome all of you. Both Monica and I are part of a group called Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons, which is a part of the United Religions Initiative. And the last 4 years, the Voices has been commemorating August 6th as Nuclear Prayer Day, inviting all individuals of goodwill and all organizations of concern to draw strength from each one's deepest convictions and longings for a better future. And this year, marking the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we're also intentionally organizing events building up toward August to reach out to different audiences who share the same goal of creating a more peaceful world. And we thought holding a CSW Parallel event is perfect because women have always been in the vanguard of fighting toward peace, security, and justice. And also some of us were in New York during the first week of March, right before the CSW started, to participate in the third meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or TPNW. I'm sure we will hear more about the TPNW later in the program, but coming off of the MSP of the treaty, which truly highlights women's leadership in nuclear disarmament, and going into the second week of the CSW, the timing couldn't have been more perfect to have this conversation. So now I'll turn it over to Monica to also welcome all of you before she introduces the next person on our program. Please take it away, Monica.
Well, thank you, Anna. And I just am so grateful to be here and to be here with so many other people from the Commission on the Status of Women, because many people come to New York and come to these Zoom programs to be informed. And we not only want you to be informed, we want to ignite your spirit. We want to bring you into helping create a world free of nuclear weapons. And the founder of both the United Religions Initiative and the Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons as a cooperation circle of the URI, the United Religions Initiative, is Bill Swing. And he keeps saying, your prayers will help you follow into actions. And so we need to think about that spirit inside of you as we meet these incredible women on this panel today. But we're going to start with the prayer that we start our monthly meetings with. And I am going to pass the floor along to Reverend Becky Suzik to say the nuclear prayer that we use, even though you could use any prayer or ignite your spirit in any way. Becky, thank you for sharing this special prayer with this wonderful group.
Thank you so much, Monica. I'm so grateful to be here and to presence the nuclear prayer. Every year on August 6th, we honor and commemorate. This year, it will be the 80th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we are grateful to the Right Reverend Bishop Swing, William Swing, who had this prayer come through him, and we recited at the beginning of our meetings. And so I invite you all, I'm going to share the prayer, to speak it aloud where you are if you choose, or to say your own prayer towards a world free of nuclear weapons. The beginning and the end are in your hands, O Creator of the universe. And in our hands, you have placed the fate of this planet. We who are tested by having both creative and destructive power in our free will, turn to you in sober fear and in intoxicating hope. We ask for your guidance and to share in your imagination in our deliberations about the use of nuclear force. Help us to lift the fog of atomic darkness that hovers so pervasively over our earth, your earth, so that soon all eyes may see life magnified by your pure light. Bless all of us who wait today for your presence and who dedicate ourselves to achieve your intended peace and rightful equilibrium on earth. In the name of all that is holy and that is hoped. Amen.
Thank you, Becky. And now, Anna, you get the privilege of introducing our wonderful panel.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you so much, Becky, for starting us off with the nuclear prayer. And for those of you who might not know Becky, she is an interfaith minister, and she is also a tech wizard, and she is kindly hosting our Zoom meeting today. And now I'm delighted to turn to our presenters. As you know, today we're featuring voices of women who have been working tirelessly to create a world without nuclear weapons and other causes to mark the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and to share information and inspiration for making your voices heard, for creating a more peaceful world. And I think, as Monica also mentioned, that is so important to emphasize, about making your voices count, because every action, every voice to reduce the threat of nuclear weapons, especially today, and working toward abolishing nuclear weapons really counts. No matter where you are, who you are, what kind of profession you are, everybody's voices matter. So with that, it is my pleasure to now introduce our first speaker, Int'l Gandhi. Int'l Gandhi was born and grew up at the Phoenix Settlement, the first ashram established by Mahatma Gandhi in Inanda, South Africa. Presently, she is retired after serving 9 years in the South African Parliament, representing ANC. During this time, she helped to set up a 24-hour domestic violence helpline in her constituency, Phoenix Township. Int'l worked as a social worker in the child welfare field and an activist in the movement against apartheid. She was placed under 9 years of banning orders, of which 5 years were under house arrest by the apartheid government. Presently, Int'l also serves as a chairperson of Gandhi Development Trust and Phoenix Settlement Trust, co-president of World Conference of Religions for Peace. Honorary doctorates were conferred on her by Durban University of Technology, Siddharth University in India, and Lincoln University in the UK. And she is a recipient of many awards, local and international. So with that, Int'l, please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I will be speaking on the moral and nonviolent imperatives of nuclear weapons. The world has heard the horrific stories told by survivors of nuclear radiation at various conferences and in various books. Yet a blind eye has been turned on these stories. In the past 80 years, instead of abandoning nuclear weapons, some have thought it prudent to develop even more lethal nuclear weapons so that even more damage can be done to people, ordinary civilian population, as well as to the earth and the environment. Is there any morality in this thinking? We have seen physically or in photographs babies born with various disabilities, bodily distortions, and the frequent diagnosis of cancer in the areas where nuclear contamination has occurred. A visit to sites such as Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all the places where nuclear testing has been done in the past 80 years, and where accidents have occurred, the grim story of what can be in store for the world if these weapons are used is revealed in its stark reality. It is difficult to imagine how inhumane it is to even think of manufacturing and possessing these kinds of weapons, leave alone using them. These weapons leave behind a trail of devastation of both the environment and the people. The effects of such devastation are increasing as further capabilities are explored. We have seen and heard testimonies from children born of victims of nuclear radiation who themselves have become victims of ill health. The grim stories of the survivors indicates what one act of inhumanity can do to so many people across such a wide field. Mahatma Gandhi wrote prophetically in his newspaper, The Harijan, in 1938, if the mad race for armaments continues, it is bound to result in a slaughter such as has never occurred in history. If there is a victor left, the very victory will be a living death for the nation that emerges victorious. 7 years later, the world witnessed the devastating effects of the use of nuclear weapons in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This attack shocked the world and raised the concern of religious communities. Can a human being really be an instrument of such agony and destruction while proclaiming to the Lord, make me an instrument of your peace? Mahatma Gandhi said to a journalist when asked how he thought wars can be stopped. And he said, I have no doubt that unless big nations shed their desire for exploitation and the spirit of violence of which war is the natural expression, an atom bomb, the inevitable consequence, there is no hope for peace in the world. But he hastened to say, not to believe in the possibility of permanent peace is to disbelieve in the godliness of human nature. 25 years later, the inaugural conference of the World Conference of Religions for Peace held in Kyoto, Japan, in 1970, in a unanimously drawn-up statement, the religious community of the world declared, and I quote, as men and women of religion, we confess in humility and penitence that we have very often betrayed our religious ideals and our commitment to peace. It is not religion that has failed the cause of peace, but religious people. This betrayal of religion can and must be corrected. While humanity sees clearly the immorality of manufacture, possession, and use of nuclear weapons, nuclear-armed states argue on the basis of the myth, which expresses the importance of possessing nuclear weapons as a deterrence. It has been pointed out by numerous organizations over the years that possession of nuclear weapons, in fact, adds to suspicion and antagonism and can lead to conflict rather than deterring conflict. It can lead to more countries investing in this deadly weapon simply because they think they can show off their might by possessing such a weapon. They do not think that use of such lethal weapons can harm not only their opponents, but themselves as well. Today, the pressing of a button is all it takes to release the bomb. How morally bankrupt can society get to invent such technology and possess such weapons? Ignoring the testimonies of so many survivors of nuclear attacks and testing sites and the sight of the agonized deaths of so many innocent civilian victims of the bomb who died not just from the attack, but from the after effects of it, such as from thirst, because the water around them was contaminated. A visit to the various test sites, which continue to be contaminated by radiation, reveals the tremendous danger of this radiation, not only on human beings, but also on nature and the earth itself. As we experience the devastating impact of climate change and contemplate the possibility of the effects of this on food production, we see the dangerous situation that humanity as a whole can be reduced to simply because of the continued existence, further proliferation and manufacture of nuclear and chemical weapons. It is said that at least 8 nations have conducted over 2,000 nuclear experiments over dozens of sites around the world. Most of these sites are in places where indigenous communities live, and they have suffered terrible harm. In his judgment, the late Justice Veera Mantri described the horror and painful, torturous deaths of those affected by the nuclear bomb attacks. Books published by United Nations Institute for Training and Research allude to the terrible after effects of the bomb and the enormous extent of the harm, yet those bent on producing these weapons remain oblivious to these scientific facts. It is time for us as civil society to raise our voices louder for the total elimination of all nuclear weapons and pave the way for a nuclear-free world. I thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ila, for your insights from the perspectives of morality and nonviolence, which I believe must be the foundation of our work, and also reminding us of the interconnected nature by all of us. It's such an honor to have you. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Kehkashan Basu. She is an iconic global influencer, educator, environmentalist, champion of women and children's rights. She's a TEDx speaker, climate reality mentor, author, musician, peace and sustainability campaigner. Kehkashan is the recipient of Canada's Meritorious Service Medal and the only Canadian to win the International Children's Peace Prize, a Forbes 30 Under 30, and the first ever winner of the Voices Youth Gorbachev Schultz Legacy Award for her work on nuclear disarmament. Kehkashan is a United Nations human rights champion, a National Geographic Young Explorer, a UNCCD Land Hero, a UN Habitat Young City Champion, the regional organizing partner for North America for the NGO Major Group, and one of Canada's top 25 women of influence. She's the founder, president of Global Social Innovation Enterprise, Green Hope Foundation, that works at a grassroots level in 28 countries, empowering over 500,000 young people and women, especially those from vulnerable communities, in the sustainable development process. She has spoken at over 500 United Nations and other global fora, and she has an MBA from Cornell University. So let's welcome Kehkashan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna, for the very kind introduction. And hello, everyone. I am truly delighted to be here with all of you today to speak on a topic that is really of critical importance and that isn't really talked about a lot, unfortunately. I don't know why, but I'm glad that we're putting a spotlight on it and that we are actually focusing on this very, very important intersection. So, as Anna mentioned, I am the founder president of Green Hope Foundation, and I am from Toronto, Canada, which is where I'm connecting with you from. And I'd like to acknowledge before I begin that Toronto is on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So, speaking to you here and connecting with all of you from literally all across the world, I'm really glad to be able to kind of speak a bit more about this intersection of gender equality, of feminism, and nuclear disarmament. Because if we look at history, we've seen time and again how women have historically been the strongest leaders in peace building movements. And when we say strong, it's not just military might, it's actually never military might. It's about the power of getting people together and advocating for a more peaceful future, of focusing on the human connections and our connections with the environment to create strong, healthy societies that thrive and that do not depend on violence as a way to kind of further their agenda. And so our leadership, women's leadership in disarmament, in anti-nuclear advocacy, and peace building initiatives have routinely demonstrated our capacity to lead this charge in creating lasting, peaceful solutions to global and local security challenges. And when we as women and girls lead, and women and girls in all of our diversity lead, it highlights the importance of not just addressing, the nuclear weapons themselves, but the different systems of inequality and inequity that actually perpetuate conflict. And this is actually something that's really important because nuclear weapons, the whole process of nuclear weapons from siting to waste sourcing, as well as militarism, anything that perpetuates conflict, so the military-industrial complex, we see how that is shaped by cis heteropatriarchal systems that prioritize power, control, and violence. So if we kind of try to draw parallels, so looking at the development of nuclear weapons and how nuclear weapons are often framed as a manifestation of male power and dominance, and the concept of strength, the concept of strength that I was talking about earlier when it comes to women and girls being, more associated with peace and empathy and the power of thriving societies. When we think about how strength is associated with nuclear weapons, we think of it in a completely different way, because it's the belief that military might, especially nuclear capabilities, are essential to national security. And that is deeply tied to the patriarchal notions of masculinity and what masculinity is supposed to be. And so these nuclear weapons are the ultimate symbols of destruction and control, and they align with traditional masculine ideals of power, of aggression, of dominance. And so the entire military-industrial complex, which sustains the production and proliferation of nuclear weapons, is built around a worldview that equates male authority with military superiority, and then somehow puts forward this idea that, we need to be protected and that nuclear weapons are essential for national security. And so even the patriarchy in the nuclear weapons sector, it also perpetuates the belief that war and conflict are natural and necessary. And when we look at patriarchal societies, war is often seen as just, an inevitable part of human existence. And as I said, the nuclear weapons are framed as this essential tool for protecting the nation state. And so this really reflects the patriarchal ideologies that prioritize military might over peace building and viewing strength and dominance, in this case, the way the strength is viewed as signs of security. And so even the people who are part of the military industrial complex, so like those who are in the weapons industry, they help normalize violence as a response to conflict. The arms race, those who are a part of that, most of the time are led by men. And the ones who are actually kind of pushing forward this nuclear arms race. So when we kind of look at it from this standpoint of seeing how the patriarchy has pushed forward the military-industrial complex and the creation of nuclear weapons and testing and all of that, we realize that there is a very, very urgent need now more than ever before to ensure that we look at it through a feminist lens. We look at it by seeing who are the people who are most affected by this military industrial complex and the cis heteropatriarchy. And once we look at it through that feminist lens, we see that women, especially in marginalized and conflict-ridden regions, often face the most devastating consequences of nuclear weapons, whether that is, actually the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, to the women who are impacted by the nuclear testing done in the Pacific Islands, the nuclear waste that's buried in the Runa Dome, the indigenous lands on which nuclear testing is undertaken, suffering disproportionately from health issues like cancer, birth defects, infertility. And all of these issues are compounded by the patriarchal disregard for the safety of these communities, and especially the women and girls, because women and girls' health is like way down on their list of priorities in a patriarchal society. And so women and girls' voices are silenced and or ignored in the pursuit of military dominance. And so we also see how women and girls are tasked with the long-term and short-term caregiving responsibilities in the aftermath of war and conflict, and so in the aftermath of the testing and the subsequent environmental degradation as well. So when we try to see how, women and girls play a role in peace building, how women and girls are disproportionately affected by the military-industrial complex and nuclear weapons, again, we see that it's not just about the weapons themselves. It's this whole other issue that is interconnected, that's intersectional. And so the solutions that need to address this huge issue need to be intersectional as well. So women's inclusion in nuclear disarmament, and not just inclusion, but women leading the nuclear disarmament process, it's a way for us to challenge these gendered power structures and move towards building a more just and peaceful world. And by having women and girls at the core of decision making, the whole concept of us, moving towards nuclear disarmament becomes more human-centered. It focuses more on the protection of lives rather than the accumulation of power and of weaponry. And while we have seen that women have been historically, excluded from the traditional decision-making processes, we also see that the grassroots movements are led by women and girls. And at Green Hope Foundation, working so heavily on disarmament education and focusing on that, we work to ensure that the students that we work with know how important and integral women are to the disarmament process. And so ensuring and including women and girls in nuclear disarmament efforts ensures that our solutions, they're comprehensive, they're holistic, and consider the long-term well-being of all people, especially those who are most marginalized. Our voices are crucial in shaping a world where security is not just defined by military might or at all by military might, but defined by human dignity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kehkashan, for your powerful remarks and bringing in the youth perspectives in today's program, and also speaking to women's leadership, which addresses the current systems of inequality and insecurity, which obviously is not working. Now let us welcome our next speaker. Kathleen Burkinshaw is an award-winning Japanese-American author and daughter of a hibakusha. She's presented to middle and high schools worldwide over 12 years, and she formerly served on advisory council at the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma and steering committee for Global Alliance, Sustainable Peace and Prosperity for All. Hiroshima, Japan. Kathleen is a featured guest on NHK World Japan, AANHPI magazines, and numerous podcasts. Writing is her outlet in daily struggle with chronic pain from reflex sympathetic dystrophy. The Last Cherry Blossom, which was published in 2016 in English, is now a UN educational resource for teachers and students, and Japanese translation was published in 2022. Kathleen most recently spoke at the 2025 UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons third meeting of states parties side event with her daughter, and they delivered a joint interfaith statement during the general exchange of views in front of the states parties and other delegates. So it's my privilege to introduce Kathleen to all of you. Thank you so much, Kathleen.
Thank you very much, Anna. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'm so honored to be on a panel with such esteemed speakers. And so I think I'll just start by saying I am a second generation Hibakusha, an atomic bomb survivor. But I didn't know that my mom was from Hiroshima until I was 11. I knew that she had horrible nightmares throughout her life, all through the year. And I remember being 5 when I was first awakened with a blood-curdling scream from her from one of her nightmares. However, when I was 11, I noticed that her nightmares increased in August. And I remembered the year before, they seemed to be worse. And so I kept asking her about it. And she finally told me that she wasn't from Tokyo, as she had said. She was born in Hiroshima, but she lost her family and friends, home, the atomic bomb. And it was too painful, and she couldn't say anything more about it, except don't tell anyone. Well, it wouldn't be until I was 31 years old when I would find out what the horror that she relived in those nightmares was. At that time, I had a near fatal blood clot, and I had been hospitalized for over a month. It was the first of many hospitalizations at that time. And so when I came home, I needed help to take care of myself and to take care of my daughter, who was 4 then, while my husband worked during the day. And so my parents had helped. At that time, I also was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and that's a chronic neurological progressive pain disease that affects the sympathetic nervous system as well as the immune system. And many physicians have said that the radiation my mother was exposed to from the atomic bombing has caused this. So at that point, I really worried because I worried how the pain would start to affect my work as trying to be a good mom. I worried, when was I going to be stuck in a wheelchair all the time? What was going to happen? And I became very, very depressed and hopeless. And it was at that time that my mom started to talk to me about August 6th. She talked to me about how there was a twist of fate for her. She was only 12 years old. Her papa normally worked from home in the morning, and then he would go into his office in town in the afternoon. But that day, he was at a train station in the morning purchasing a ticket for one of his employees. That weekend, my mother had been very sick. So her papa said, "You can stay home one more day." So that kept her at home on a Monday while the rest of the students in her class were in the center of town, taking down wooden buildings. So she remembers being able to talk with her best friend, Machiko, outside. She was a couple years older than my mother, and so she wasn't in the center of town that day. And as they were talking, they saw a weather plane fly over, and they weren't concerned. But then my mother said when she heard another engine, as the hair on the back of her neck stood up, she said there was this ear-shattering, loud popping noise and a bright white light, and the ground just started shaking. And so she and her friend just hugged each other and were screaming. By the end of that day, she would have watched her beloved papa die. She would have lost the best friend that she had just clung to hours before. And over the next few years, she would lose the family that she grew up with due to the radiation sickness from the atomic bombing. Now, when my mom told me this, she would cry as if she was watching it happen all over again. And I will always hear her voice telling me that. And then she said to me, "I'm telling you this because I had wanted to kill myself when I lost everyone and everything. But I'm so glad that I didn't, because I now have you and I have your daughter to love. She reminded me that I had the same blood in my system and that I had strength and I would find my own way too. She never said much more about August 6th until my daughter was then in 7th grade. My daughter came home very, very upset. She overheard some kids talking about that cool mushroom cloud. And she asked if I would talk about the people under the cloud that day, like her grandmother. And I really thought my mother would say no because I hadn't spoken about it, but she said yes. And she said, you know, the students in that class will be about the same age I was when the bomb dropped, so maybe they could relate to me. And more importantly, she knew they would all be voters someday, and they could leave that classroom knowing that nuclear weapons should never be used again. And so when I speak to students, and when I wrote the book, The Last Cherry Blossom, I wanted to be able to give a feel of the culture, of who the people are, what the politics were at that time. And also then to show that the children, like my mom, they love their families, they love their friends, they worried what might happen to them, and they wished for peace. That was everything that the Allied children were wishing and thinking of as well. And also to know that, you know, the enemy is not so different from us after all. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many students around the world, and the one thing they say that gets them to take notice about nuclear weapons is the story of a 12-year-old little girl in Hiroshima and how easily it could be them. In order for a lot of this disarmament news and statistics to really matter, people have to have that connection to the humanity. We may have many leaders as time passes. Technology can change, but that need for connection through our emotions and with our stories, that is timeless. And future voters and voters need to understand of the lives that were shattered, the homes and the loved ones that were lost, and that lifetime of physical and emotional scarring that then is passed down to their future generations. And as a child, I would watch my mom go through her scars of PTSD. As an adult, I live with those scars every day as the pain progresses from RSD. But even though my mom lost so much that day, she never lost her ability to love. And I was blessed because she lived to be 82 years old. And she passed away in January of 2015. But a few months before then, I had the publishing contract for The Last Cherry Blossom. And she took it and she put it in front of her favorite photo of her and her papa. And she said, you know, I didn't know why I am alive when everyone else I loved died. But now I do. I couldn't tell my story, but I had you, and you can tell it for me. My mother was the bravest person I will ever know. And I am so honored that she would share her memories with my daughter and with myself. As a child, I did not know how to comfort her, but as an adult, I take her love and her strength, and I use it to embolden me to continue to fight through my pain and disability so that her voice, her story, the voices of all Hibakusha will never be silenced. And so that they know that families, no family should ever, ever suffer like that again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for sharing your story, your mom's story, and truly reminding us that nuclear weapons are not this abstract security issue. It's a human issue. Thank you so much for sharing from your heart. We will now hear from Audrey Kitagawa. Audrey is a cum laude Blackstonian Pre-Roll Honor Society graduate from the University of Southern California. She obtained her Juris Doctorate degree from Boston College Law School. She practiced law in Honolulu, Hawaii, and at the time of her retirement, she was Martindale-Hubbell AV rated, which is the highest rating for professional and ethical excellence attorney. She is the president and founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, President of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family, Chair of the Anti-Racism Initiative, Chair of the Gender Equality Working Group, and a member of the Advisory Council of the G20 Interfaith Forum. Audrey is a UN representative for the United Religions Initiative, a trustee for the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, and a member of the Advisory Council for the Global Security Institute. Thank you so much, Audrey. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna. And thank you to all the presenters. Good afternoon, everyone. It is really my privilege to be on this panel with truly outstanding women activists for a nuclear weapons-free world. As we are in the 80th anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we are seeking to mobilize greater numbers of civil society organizations to raise awareness about the existential dangers which nuclear weapons pose. Since the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we went from the US being the sole possessor of nuclear weapons to 9 countries now having nuclear weapons capability. With Russia's invasion of Ukraine and ratcheting up talks about the use of nuclear weapons, especially by Russia, the concern about the use of nuclear weapons has become a real possibility. Ukraine, after the fall of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, was left with one of the world's largest nuclear weapons stockpile. The third largest nuclear power, Ukraine inherited weapons stockpile. The third largest nuclear power, it inherited about 5,000 nuclear weapons, including intercontinental missiles that could deliver thermonuclear warheads. In 1994, Ukraine signed the Budapest Memorandum, a significant treaty in which the United Kingdom, Russia, and the United States guaranteed Ukraine's security sovereignty and its international integrity, its territorial integrity. In return for giving up its nuclear weapons, the Budapest Memorandum also guaranteed that these countries would not threaten or use military action against Ukraine and will call for UN action in case of Ukraine being threatened at any time. The Budapest Memorandum that provided for protection earlier hadn't managed to deter the violence it was intended to prevent. This conflict illustrates the vulnerabilities of Ukrainian security in an order of the world where nuclear forces are not dependable guarantors of peace. The deeper issue is the integrity of signatories to agreements to honor their commitments and agreements. Putin announced in November of last year that any massive aerial attack on Russia by a non-nuclear power with the participation or support of a nuclear power would be seen as a joint attack on the Russian Federation, which would trigger a nuclear response from Russia. In this climate of escalation and instability, the element of trust has been eroded to the detriment of global security. Peace and security depend on cooperation, not conflict, but cooperation is not possible if leaders and governments are driven by power and dominance, ignoring the sacredness of human life and the connection that we all have to one another. In an article by Gideon Rose in Foreign Affairs, there's much speculation as to which country would go next if the world order continues to erode. South Korea has been mentioned as the first to be swept into this new proliferation of nuclear weapons. Ukraine, Taiwan, Poland, and Australia have also been mentioned. No one knows at this point in time if our current administration will go so far as to abandon our historic allies. No one yet knows how far our current administration will go to abandon the alliances it has built up over generations. Allies are considering some of the choices they made on the assumption that they would have sustained American protection. The barriers that have long kept proliferation at bay may very well be unraveling. The Japanese government officially recognized about 650,000 survivors or hibakusha of those who were bombed. After the war and today, their numbers are dwindling. Many hibakusha became anti-nuclear and anti-war activists, sharing their powerful personal stories as survivors of the world's first nuclear attacks. They were honored for demonstrating through witness testimony that nuclear weapons must never be used again, and for choosing to use their agonizing experiences and suffering to cultivate hope and to advocate for peace. Consistent with Japanese cultural norms, victims try to maintain an outward order, known as gaman, to maintain a semblance of social harmony and order. Professor Noriko Odagiri of Tokyo International University explained that Japanese people value not saying too much and suppressing the negative feelings towards others. Gaman, which originated in Zen Buddhist teachings, meaning bearing the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity, became a perseverance and survival mechanism in post-war Japan. For some, this led to shame and isolation and a tendency to minimize, ignore, or try to forget the trauma they experienced. But a number of survivors overcame their cultural reticence and became activists who dedicated their lives to sharing the stories of the devastating losses they suffered. Approximately 106,000 hibakusha are still alive today, living reminders of what is at stake. They are the world's only survivors of nuclear war, and they continue to use their voices to promote peace and a world free of nuclear weapons. In 2024, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Nihon Hidankyo, a group representing hibakusha, for its efforts to achieve a world free of nuclear weapons and for demonstrating through witness testimony that nuclear weapons must never be used again. Following the Nobel Peace Award, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan issued a statement that said, as the only country to have ever suffered atomic bombings during war, Japan has a historic mission to lead international efforts towards a world without nuclear weapons. Hibakusha Miyako Taguchi lost both of her parents in the Hiroshima blast. She reflected, we can't change our horrible past, but our future is in our hands. We can't bring the victims back to life. We can't cure the pains and agonies that they went through, but we can stop this mass destruction from happening again. We all deserve peace in our lives. Wars and nuclear weapons will never give us peace, but love and compassion will. We should forget which country we belong to and which country we were born in. We are all residents of the earth. In 2017, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to ICAN. One of the representatives of ICAN who delivered the Nobel Peace Prize lecture was hibakusha Setsuko Thurlow. She recalled regaining consciousness in a collapsed building in the aftermath of the Hiroshima bomb and hearing a man say, don't give up, keep pushing. See the light coming through that opening? Crawl towards it as quickly as you can. She emerged from the rubble to utter devastation, but she survived. Mrs. Thurlow said to the Nobel audience and to the world, when I was a 13-year-old girl, trapped in the smoldering rubble, I kept pushing, I kept moving towards the light, and I survived. To all in this hall and all listening around the world, I repeat these words that I heard called to me in the ruins of Hiroshima. Don't give up. Keep pushing. See the light. Crawl towards it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for sharing the current geopolitical climate, which is truly concerning. And also, I appreciated your insights on the cultural aspects of hibakusha's experience. We must advance nuclear disarmament, especially this year, to honor their voices. Now we will have our last speaker to finish this panel on a strong note. So I'm delighted to introduce Susi Snyder. She is the program coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. Her responsibilities include facilitating the development and execution of ICAN's key programs, including the management of ICAN's divestment work and engagement with the financial sector. Susi previously served as the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom at the Geneva Secretariat. So thank you so much, Susi. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Anna. This has been such a delightful and interesting group of speakers. I don't know, I feel like you said everything I could want to say. And that's always a challenge, but I'll try to do my best. It's amazing to be in this Commission on the Status of Women kind of nexus again, because as Anna said, I spent a long time with WILPF, and CSW was where we worked really hard to bring the women, peace, and security agenda to the forefront. And WILPF has a history of bringing peace and disarmament issues into women's spaces. We organized the Peace Tent in Nairobi and the Peace Tent in Beijing following that. And I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for the platform, the Beijing Platform for Action, and in particular, paragraph 28, which talks about women's role in building peace and especially in building towards nuclear disarmament. Today, I'm going to do my best to touch on 3 points. I'm going to talk about why nuclear weapons are a women's issue. I'm going to talk about why women must be at the seat at nuclear weapons negotiating tables. And I'm going to talk briefly about why feminist analysis of security as a whole would go a long way to eliminating nuclear weapons for good. But each one of those points is multiple dissertations. So I'm not going to go into them in extreme detail because already you've heard quite a lot of this from previous speakers, and I just want to highlight a couple of things. So firstly, let's talk about why nuclear weapons are a women's issue. And there's an old anecdote that I started to hear when I came into this work a while ago. And it was talked about when John F. Kennedy, US President John F. Kennedy, signed the Partial Test Ban Treaty, which forced nuclear weapons testing underground. He was asked, John, why did you do this? And he said, it's because of the women. Because women had been circling the White House for months. They had been pushing their baby carriages, carrying placards, and they were there because above ground nuclear weapons explosions in the Nevada desert had caused their babies' teeth to be contaminated with radioactive strontium-90. There was a research effort called the Baby Teeth Project that had put out advertisements and requests across the US to ask parents to send their children's baby teeth to be tested. And they found there was a distinct difference in those teeth depending on when babies were born. Those born before nuclear weapons testing in Nevada and those born after. Children born in 1963 had levels of strontium-90, which is a radioactive particle. It mimics calcium in the human body. And children born in 1963 had at least 50 times more strontium-90 in their teeth than those born in 1950. And that was because of atomic testing. And since that time, a lot more research has been done. I like doing research. I believe in policy. I believe in evidence-based policymaking. And we've seen and learned that young girls exposed to radiation are twice as likely to develop cancer throughout their lifetimes compared to boys of the same age group. Little girls are twice as likely as little boys to suffer the effects of nuclear weapons. And existing radiation standards have been based on a reference man model. I think it should be a comic book, Reference Man. I don't know if he's a good guy, but I kind of think he's a bad guy because he ignores the physiological differences between the sexes. In particular, that the higher reproductive tissue density in females increases their vulnerability to ionizing radiation, and that hormonal factors also impact the risks for cancer, cardiovascular disease, and stroke. There's a difference. And for decades, female bodies have not been adequately considered when looking at the impacts of nuclear weapons. So there's a need for better sex disaggregated data collection, especially to inform policy decisions around nuclear disarmament, around environmental remediation, and around victim assistance. And that's one of the reasons I think nuclear weapons is a women's issue. But women need to be at the table as well. And at any given international diplomatic meeting on nuclear weapons, almost half of country delegations are composed entirely of men. Less than a fifth of statements given in these meetings are likely to be given by women. Women have been excluded and have not been at these tables. And I think back to former US Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair, because that is what we have seen starting to happen. There's been a demand and a taking, a seizing of space in these negotiations, a space to discuss issues around nuclear weapons. And one of the most poor examples of this that I can think of are the 2017 negotiations on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And that featured a lot of female leaders. Many of the most active delegations were led by women, including Ireland, New Zealand, the Philippines, South Africa, Sweden, Switzerland, Thailand, and the negotiating conference president was also a woman. And the TPNW, the nuclear ban treaty that emerged from those negotiations, addresses issues like the differentiated biological sex impacts of nuclear weapons. It also begins to challenge the dominant gender narrative around nuclear weapons. Because you can't just add women and stir to get the results that you want. We need to go a little bit deeper on this. And I really appreciate Kehkashan talked about how gender discourses on violence and weapons, which, for example, frame certain weapons as symbols of masculine strength, also frame women as being in need of male protection. And that can shape how disarmament issues are addressed. They can also foster women's exclusion. So we need to bring this feminized security analysis to broader discussions around nuclear weapons. I have a former colleague, Ray Atchison, who talks about how nuclear weapons are a linchpin of militarized masculinities, signifying the ultimate form of strength and power. And in this context, those who amplify the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons and call for their prohibition are often accused of being emotional or irrational. Those are typical gendered responses meant to feminize and ridicule. And that kind of gendered framing is extremely problematic when it comes to credible approaches to security. And we've seen this happening and seen challenges to this and seen a significant pushback to this sort of framing quite recently. We've heard a little bit here about the third meeting of states parties to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which took place concluded just 10 days ago in New York. And states parties to the treaty at that time, they called for a broad recognition of their legitimate security concerns. But these are states that came together and that support a security approach that does not involve nuclear weapons. It does not involve being guarded or involved or connected to anyone else's nuclear weapons. It thoroughly and comprehensively rejects anything to do with nuclear weapons. And these states who are threatened by nuclear violence that is perpetuated by practices of nuclear deterrence had to call for and claw to the idea of their own security as legitimate, their own concerns as legitimate. This is pushing back against this dominant militarized masculinity that accepts the idea of nuclear deterrence as somehow okay. And by forcing others to reckon with the legitimacy of more than half the UN membership's security concerns, the TPNW states parties are pushing back against what has, until now, been considered a sort of normal nuclear weapons discourse. They are breaking through the fog of atomic darkness to shine a light on a major problem for all of us, namely nuclear deterrence. And we can no longer allow or afford to let our leaders or each other be deceived by that false promise of nuclear deterrence. And I'll say this, Ella put this so much more eloquently in describing it as a moral failing, but all I can do is call it a scam. Nuclear deterrence is a scam that has been perpetuated on us to justify the ongoing retention of nuclear weapons. They sold us a story, and we can't afford to buy it any longer. Because, again, going back to what Kehkashan said, we need security defined by human dignity, not militarized masculinities. So to sum up, nuclear weapons, they disproportionately harm female bodies. Women have been historically excluded from the decision-making, and the ban treaty provides a pathway to change all of this. But we have a responsibility too. We have to have everyday conversations about nuclear weapons so that more people are talking about this. And we can learn from Kathleen's example and tell everyone about the reality beneath the mushroom cloud and how easily it could be any of us. And it's because nuclear weapons are not normal. They're a problem, but one with a solution to which everyone can contribute. And I just want to close by calling Monica back in, because what she said when we opened, that we need to ignite the spirit in our efforts to help the world understand this. We do. We need to ignite the spirit in our efforts to help the world understand nuclear weapons are not normal, but they're a problem we can and we will fix together. Thank you.
Wow. Anna did such a brilliant job in thanking all of the other panelists. And Susie, everything that you said reminded me of how the interconnectedness, how our voices matter, how the legal parts that have been really pushed through are making a difference. And that fact that so many people need to really step up and join this movement to bring the reality that nuclear weapons do not make us safer, that they are actually just making us a tinderbox. And we need to know that between Gorbachev and Reagan and between Putin and Biden, there was this whole sense of a nuclear war can never be won. And they agreed. Therefore, it should never be fought. And the fact that we are still looking at it as a source of power when we need to change the narrative. And we've been called in by you and by everyone on this panel. I am absolutely blown away by what I've learned this morning from all of you. We've gone from a moral call to a global perspective to a personal story, to the legal ramifications, to the global hope and the global knowledge that we can make a difference. And so I have the honor of being able to ask you if there is either another statement or a question that you would like to ask one of the other panelists, because we didn't want to put a parameter on anyone and we didn't want to assign anyone anything. So I'm looking for someone to raise their hand to start the conversation between one another. But first of all, just know that everyone on this call is thanking each and every one of you from the bottom of our hearts for the role you've played in bringing nuclear weapons into our world today and inspiring us. So I just want to thank you and see a hand on who would like to open this conversation among you on this panel. Please.
Also, just wanted to see if Ela could turn on her camera so we could spotlight her. We would appreciate it. That way she can be part of the conversation as well.
Thank you. So I don't see a hand. Is there anyone who would like to comment on someone else's speech? Okay, Audrey, please unmute yourself and begin the conversation.
Thank you so much. I really don't have a question to any of the panelists, but I did want to make some comments about how informative and educational about linking the gender issue with nuclear weapons and the entire military-industrial complex. So, Kehkashan, thank you so much for making that link. After all, we are in the Commission on the Status of Women. And so this link is very, very important. So when you commented that the entire military-industrial complex is built around the idea of male superiority and that nuclear weapons are essential, the empirical ideology that makes might dominate. And I think these are very, very important concepts for us to be able to adopt. And this whole aspect of patriarchy, and that this poses a way for us to challenge, to move toward building a more women-based, more centered on life rather than power and domination. So I really, really appreciate you so much for making that connection, and also to you, Susi, as well. So when you indicated that the TPNW are pushing back what has been considered normal, and we can no longer afford our leaders to be led on nuclear weapons, and we just can't buy into it any longer. And that, I think, shifts the narrative for us that we need to go with human dignity and not male masculinity. And I also wanted to call our attention to the very important UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which 25 years ago, it outlined what the United Nations and its member states need to do to incorporate a gender perspective into peacekeeping operations and to promote women's full involvement in all efforts to maintain and promote peace and security. So the resolution was quite historic, and I am very, very pleased to see that the voices of women continue to open the narrative, push the narrative on this very issue, to have women have a place at the table of peace and the women's recognition in decision-making, and that women's life experiences throughout the conflict cycle must always be considered. So thank you so much. This has been a very educational and informative link for this to have been made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And it seems like Susi would like to say something.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that. I'm so glad you raised 1325 in this context. It's such an important resolution. And I always think about how, I believe it was Cora Weiss from the Hague Appeal for Peace and many other incredible movements over time. Cora Weiss, I remember she used to talk about 1325 a lot, and she talked about it as the 3 Ps. It was protection, participation, and prevention, and how those 3 Ps of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda have manifested themselves in international instruments since that time. And we see it kind of within the broader humanitarian disarmament trend, where there is a real attention to the protection of individuals, the protection of marginalized groups. We see the participation of these groups, a lot of effort made to ensure meaningful participation. Again, not just, oh, here's one statement that you have for 5 minutes, thank you very much, now you can go home in this 10-day meeting. No, but actual significant participation. And then overwhelmingly prevention. And when we talk about nuclear weapons, we have to prevent their use, because we cannot afford the complex, cascading, catastrophic consequences of their use, especially in a conflict today. And so I'm so glad that you raised it, because I think it's key that we make these links. This is an intersectional issue. And this is one that, so many of us come at this from different areas and different backgrounds and different angles. And yet nuclear weapons are a problem that we can fix. We have the tools, we have the know-how. It's honestly not rocket science to dismantle nuclear weapons. And so it's just a matter of choice to do so. And I love that we have this opportunity to speak together and help others see how very powerful we are, as well as how much possibility there is to make this choice.
Great. I will let Kehkashan speak a little bit, and then we're going to open the floor for comments and questions from everybody else, because our audience is so eager to participate. Thank you, Kehkashan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Madam Kitagawa and Susie, for your comments. And thank you to all of our panelists. Actually, it's just always such a wonderful learning experience for me to be able to be amongst people who are committed to this cause. And I just actually wanted to say thank you, Susie, for highlighting the choice aspect. I think that for us, working in the peace building movement, and those of us who are just, trying to create a better world for all, it is a no-brainer that, like, why do we have these weapons? There's literally no need for them. But because we have this military industrial complex, because we have this arms race, because we have these stakeholders who have these vested interests that are making them more money, that who are thriving in this, this violent space, it's like they're actively kind of pushing for the opposite, even though every single person who kind of looks in the space and just knows that to create any kind of a peaceful world, we need to abolish nuclear weapons. And I mentioned briefly in my remarks about a disarmament education that Green Hope Foundation undertakes. And what we see is that one of their main tactics to kind of push forward their agenda is kind of taking forward this veil of secrecy. So if people don't know about the problem, they can't act. And so nuclear weapons and either making nuclear weapons or what's going, like, what nuclear weapons are, what states have them, what we can do to abolish nuclear weapons. That's not taught in schools. It's seen as a taboo subject. And so if people then don't have that education, they just can't do anything about it. And so removing this veil of secrecy is extremely important. That's what we do with our disarmament education. And with that knowledge, it gives people the power to act, and that's where the choice comes in. So that is something that I just wanted to just put out there quickly. And yeah, once again, thank you all so much for your comments. So delighted to be here.
Thank you, Kehkashan. Ila, if you would like to share something, you can do it really quickly, and then I'm gonna turn the floor to everybody else.
I just wanted to quote from, Mrs. Her Excellency Mrs. Laura Chinchilla Miranda of Costa Rica, who had said when she released the resource guide on nuclear disarmament, and she said that if only the funds that are spent on building these weapons, if they could be channeled into social, needs of the community, we would not only avoid the possibility of wars, but we would also make a happier, contented community around the world. And there are, some people have actually done the maths, and they've shown how much countries can provide for their population if the money is diverted from arms industry into, social expenditure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ila. And I'm sure Susie would love to jump on that, but please hold that thought. And I'm going to segue into the Q&A, and I'll pass it on to Monica. But let me read the first question that came in through the chat. And I'm also recognizing some hands in the audience as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for your interest, enthusiasm, and patience. So the first question is, how can we as women best help raise this issue to our key leaders in an effective way? What are some avenues we should know about to collectively raise our voices? So I would turn to any speakers who would like to answer this question. Ila?
I think one of the ways in which one can raise the issues is if we collect all the information, the evidence that people have given, like Kathleen, spoke about how, the people in Nagasaki and Hiroshima were affected. if we have those stories, little stories, and tell them and popularize them, let everyone know what happened to these people, then people will begin to realize that nuclear weapons are not just ordinary things that people need to be more conscious of and begin to protest about.
Thank you so much, Ela. I want to thank everyone who's helped me because now I've had to switch devices. Something happened to my iPad that I was unexpecting. So
I think both Susie and Audrey wanted to comment on the question as well, Monica.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you all very much. I think it's a very good question. And one of the things that, like, what those who are listening, when you go away from this session, there are a couple of things that you're going to remember. You're going to remember the story about Kathleen's mom, right? Because we connect with the human. We connect with other people. We connect with the idea of a 12-year-old girl. Some people might remember that, you know, $3,000 a minute was spent last year on nuclear weapons. It's insane. But honestly, most of us are going to remember the story of Kathleen's mom. And I think that's the thing that we need to do, is to focus on how we can share these stories, how we can make sure that people understand that underneath the mushroom cloud is life and humanity, and it is all of the wondrous beings of nature that exist underneath that mushroom cloud. And that's where we start, is talking about that story. And then the facts, the figures, the evidence, all of these pieces come afterwards. They reinforce it. But I hope everybody leaves and we talk about Kathleen's mom. It's a great place to start.
You can unmute, Monica.
Important. And what we really have to remember are those personal stories. And now we have some other questions that have come up in the chat. And I am in the middle of a technical issue. Anna, I'm sorry. Can you ask Maria the question?
Absolutely. And I see that Maria has been patiently waiting with her hands up, so I would like for her to have the chance to ask her question.
Yes, thank you so much for giving me the floor, and thank you so much to all the panelists for this incredible session. I actually wrote during my master's an essay on the importance of intersectional feminist voices in the nuclear policy space, and I came across a very interesting study written also by women, and it was about women in the nuclear policy space in the US. And they were saying that it happens sometimes that women in the nuclear policy space try to imitate the views of their male counterparts, and they ignore, or like they kind of leave behind, the feminist ideals in order to fit in, you know, with the whole male team that they're in. They call this consensual straitjacket. And I was just wondering if you think this is actually a real problem, if you've seen it, if it is an actual problem, how can we address it? And yeah, I'm just very curious to see your experience with this issue.
It's kind of like sorry, I hate a silence. It's kind of like the way a male journalist, when interviewing a woman candidate, will ask them if they will hesitate to push the button in a nuclear armed state. That's almost one of the first questions. And it always comes from a male journalist. And it forces that woman who's running for office to present in a certain way that is considered part of the dominant discourse and considered okay within that situation. You saw it. Theresa May pops into my mind, and how, without hesitation said, of course, not thinking that to push a button like that means incinerating in a flash of light tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, perhaps leading to millions of innocent deaths. It's just, will you do it? Will you not do it? So I think that does exist. I think that I think that is where the add one woman and stir recipe doesn't work, and why there have been subsequent studies around, you see it around women in boardrooms and corporate boardrooms, and why the laws passed in some Nordic countries requiring a percentage of companies earning above a certain level to have a minimum of 35 to 40% gender balance on their boards, in order to prevent that, what do you call it, consensualized straitjacket? Is that what you called it? Yeah. It's explicitly to prevent that type of thinking. But again, there's lots of things around this, and I'm sure that was a really good study, and I hope you share the link in the chat with everybody, please.
Thank you so much, Susie. Audrey, yes?
Thank you so much. Maria, please join United Religions Initiative, Voices for a Nuclear Weapons Free World. We would love to have your participation, and this is for everyone listening, because it is, for people who are interested on the nuclear weapons issue and who have a commitment to see the non-proliferation and the abolition of nuclear weapons. So I would certainly encourage you to join. I'm sure they would love to have you there. So there's another question, and in the chat box, and this was addressed. Shall I proceed to go to that question?
Absolutely. I'm not sure which one you're looking up, but please go ahead.
This is the one addressed to me specifically on the situation of Ukraine, and Ukraine being victimized by Russia. In what ways can the international community live up to their commitments in regard to the nuclear weapon peace and security Ukraine signed for peace? We have to remember that this Budapest memorandum was a quid pro quo in many respects to induce Ukraine, which had the world's third largest arsenal, to give up their nuclear weapons, in exchange for which the Budapest Memorandum was signed. And it was specifically a written promise by Russia, the United Kingdom, and the United States that in exchange for the nuclear weapons, these countries agreed that they would recognize the territorial sovereignty of Ukraine and that they would protect Ukraine from any invasion, by outsiders, or especially by the signatories of the agreement memorandum. So this is why I posed in my opening comments that the trust levels have gone down so significantly that it has rendered our agreements, our word, our commitments, even in writing, nugatory. And so, what good is having an agreement if you're not going to keep it? Because trust is a very, very important, as George Shultz, the former Secretary of State, said, trust is the currency of diplomacy. So we have basically expunged this important currency. And all of human relationships are based fundamentally on trust. Once trust is broken, or repeatedly broken, how can you possibly consider the person that you would enter into any agreement with to be able to honor their agreements? And so human nature is such that if you can't trust working with someone, if you can't trust their ability to honor their word, then the relationship basically goes nowhere. And this is true, whether it's in a marital context, in any kind of intimate context. Once trust is broken, it's very difficult to be regained. And it is very, very sad to see that this level of trust has just been so eroded in our international community, and it really must be restored. It is an issue of integrity that we will honor our agreements and keep our word. So I feel that this is very fundamental to human relationships and the quality of human relationships, and so too in our international agreements. So what can we do for the world to be committed to prevent nuclear weapons, for protection against non-nuclear power? What we can do is first to make sure that we have taken responsibility as a global citizen to honor our word, our commitment to make sure that we ourselves are living trustworthy, honest lives so we can have good relationships. And of course, take that up the chain. And it's sad to see how many of our international treaties have not been adhered to, not just in the nuclear weapons realm, but as we can see, especially in the nuclear weapons realm. So thank you.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you to this amazing team on this call. I thank you so much. There was one question that I saw in the chat as I was scrolling through, and it was talking about the psychological impact of Fukushima. And the impact reminded me, and the one I wanted to ask all of you, is this psychological impact of how dangerous it is that we don't even talk about nuclear weapons. And so part of my question to you is, if you had a specific way of really addressing people who aren't talking about nuclear weapons, how would you bring it up? The stories about Kathleen, the books that we have, the costs of it, where we could be spending the money. How do we need to regroup to make this impact? And I, of course, want to go on under the spiritual side, but I just want to make sure we don't eliminate something that we need to address before we go there. Kathleen, do you have something specific that you would like to add?
Yes. I want to talk a little bit about what you were mentioning. There's a multi-generational trauma that happens. And being on that advisory board and being part of helping with Dr. Daniele's survey that they did with for nuclear bomb victims or Holocaust victims, especially for what I know with nuclear bomb, is that there was a trauma mostly of silence. As you remember, my mother had told me, don't tell anyone. And I think she had that silence told to her even when she was in Tokyo after the bombing, because they weren't allowed to talk about it. And there's also, when you witness your loved one going through these stages of anger that you don't understand and depression that you don't understand. And so that kind of forms on you because you internalize that. And then if you add a physical illness to it, it can then also then go the next generation, like my daughter. My daughter has suffered by seeing me be sick. She said something that I did not hear from her before 2 weeks ago when we were at the MSP3. She said that she feared turning 30 next year because that was the decade that I got sick. And she was very scared of what she might have at that point. So it's so important that they realize, as the actual Hibakusha are passing away, it is the next generations that are still here, that are still trying to deal with that. And it's not being talked about as much, but it is very, very important. Thank you, Monica, for bringing that up.
Thank you, Kathleen, for your story, for what you carry and how you carry it, because it is so important for you to share your story, that regardless of what you've been feeling, we know you're in pain many times when you've talked. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you inspire in us, and I hope on everyone on this call. I do want to look a little bit at that moral call that Ela started with. And Audrey mentioned Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. And I see Kehkashan's hand. Let's start there. Okay, go ahead, Kehkashan. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to add on the psychological safety perspective and like how we address that. Just with our work with Green Hope Foundation, our disarmament education programs are like we target young people of kind of like across the spectrum, and a lot of that includes working with really, really young children as well. And we always want to make sure that we're giving them the knowledge, but at the same time, we're not, scaring them off. We're doing so in a way that's healthy for them so that they grow up knowing what has happened. They grow up with the knowledge, and they also are not like, oh my gosh, like, what do I do now? There is no hope. We never want to put that out there. We always want to give them that hope that something can be done. So I just wanted to share that starting from the really, really young age, kind of going step by step, kind of trying to instill empathy in them for people and planet, going from there to like, okay, there are some people who have done bad things in the past, explaining to them in a really kind of simple way so that they understand that there have been not so great things that have happened in the past, and that it's important for them to utilize that empathy that they're gaining to be good people, to be good citizens, to be good human beings, to help one another. And once that's kind of instilled in them, and as they grow older, we kind of teach them more and more about like kind of inserting the whole peace building process, nuclear disarmament, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so it's like a gradual process to make sure that they're equipped with the tools and skill sets to address nuclear disarmament as they grow older, but also protecting their mental health, ensuring that they have that psychological safety, and so that they grow up to be, empathetic, responsible global citizens. So I just wanted to put that out there of how we use disarmament education to provide that psychological safety for children.
Thank you. And disarmament, nonviolence, skills of empathy, in doing it at the young age and growing into it, I just want to thank you for your work with the people around the world at the grassroots level, Kehkashan. It's been very important. Susi, I see that you had your hand up before on this. Did you have more to talk about on the mental side of it? Would there be anybody else who would like to speak to this particular aspect on how we can help bring the hope? What would be your particular focus in one or two words or in an explanation like Kehkashan just gave? Then I thank you for not waving your hand, and I will go on for just a little bit because there are two things that I would like to share about this program today. Voices for a World Free of Nuclear Weapons. We have heard incredible talent and inspiration, and now we do need to do something. And one thing that people can do from wherever they are is to add your spirit and your prayers. And a question that has often hit me is, how have we been able to work with the Japanese as well as we have for 80 years? And for those of us who've been blessed to have been supported by, my husband was in the camera business, so I know what it was like for him to work for a Japanese country. What quality of forgiveness, of hope, of looking towards the future do we need to learn from the Japanese people for being able to accept this atomic bomb and move beyond it in many ways? And it isn't just because it was repressed, it's something else, because when you go to Japan today, you're not hated because of who we are. There's a skill that we need to really, really pick up and to learn and to share. And to me, it is a spiritual calling to add our hope and our looking for the future and to know that we can create a better world by being better people. And I just want to invite everyone to consider how you can add your spirit, particularly in this 80th anniversary year, to know and bring your voices to not just the political realms, but to the kitchen tables, to the churches, to your discourse. We have to discharge the pointing of fingers. We have to discharge the quick response in so many ways. So particularly as women, and women who are dedicated to make our world a better place, I invite each of you to add your spirit. And I will share a personal experience, which is the little prayer, may peace prevail on earth, because that was given by a Japanese philosopher. And he said, we accepted the atomic bomb, we have to give back peace. And most of us have not experienced a nuclear bomb firsthand. But today I'm calling on each of you to give back peace in a way that stretches you and connects you, and that we can help rebuild community with people around the world, because without nuclear weapons, that frees up an economy for a much better world. And I would invite all of us to look towards this 80th anniversary as something to take action toward, be it through political works, be it through art, music, uniting in conversations. It's time. The time is now to call for a world free of nuclear weapons with every voice that we can gather. And our prayers are one way of doing that. And so today I ask you to mark on your calendar August 6th as Nuclear Prayer Day, to find at least 2 other people, maybe 200 other people, to join you in an event, and know that you can make a difference by connecting locally and acting globally, by caring and adding your heart in prayer to making a world free of nuclear weapons. And I am just so grateful to everyone on this call. I'm seeing some things in the chat on different resources, and we have your emails. We can make sure to give you some resources, and afterwards. I want to thank you for making the time. And I'm wondering if there is any last word that you would like to add to your gracious hosting and your insight on commenting, Anna, because I look to you and to Kehkashan in particular, and to Kathleen as this younger generation who can help us. And we've stood on the shoulders of others. And I'd really love to have you add anything you'd like to add personally.
Yes, thank you so much for this. So incredible, not only in terms of the information being shared, but the heart and just really touching experience of all of us coming together as women. And I'm sure everybody in the audience was inspired. And we hope that you continue to join us in future programs toward the Nuclear Prayer Day. So I put a link to the Nuclear Prayer Day webpage. And in fact, there's another webinar that we're doing with the Charter for Compassion later in the month, I believe on March 26th. And Kehkashan is a speaker there as well, featuring young voices for nuclear weapons free world. So please join us, please support the website, and let's really act toward August 6th and beyond, based on our prayer, our consciousness, our heart. Thank you so much once again to all of you for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.